Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. This is your boy, the Diggly Dude, Doc, Mr. Peptide Panther, Mr. Slippers, here with the Wobbly Wildcard. This is another episode of the Nishcast in 2020. It's another year, and we are here to talk none other, the man, the myth, the Taniwha, Mr. Steven Adams. So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive with the Wobbly Wildcard, talking all about Steven Adams and his Oklahoma City Thunder, and his homies, who are doing pretty damn well. And it's a beautiful little sporting tale that is going on in the depths of the USA. So we're going to enjoy some Steven Adams conversation for the bulk of this podcast. There have been a few other things happening around, so we'll just work our way quickly through a couple of matters and then touch on old Steve, Wobbly Wildcard. Our second episode of 2020. How are you?
I'm churning along nicely. I went for the second episode of 2020, but I went for my first run of 2020. Actually, first run since before Christmas this morning. So if I stop responding by the end of the podcast, it's probably because I passed out. But you gotta get the tough ones out of the way first before you ease up on them, I guess.
Look at 2020. Great start to 2020 for the Wellington Phoenix Wildcard. Can you just quickly tell the listeners something about the Wellington Phoenix? Because they're on top of the fucking world at the moment.
Mate, they're playing of all the sports teams that I follow and write about and even just playing support, they might be the number one most exciting one right now. They're 9 games unbeaten. They've won 3 in a row. They're playing just gorgeous football, and Ulysses Devere is one of the 2 or 3 best players in the league right now, the way he's tracking, and you got a whole bunch of young fellas just tearing it up for the Phoenix, and a brilliant coach. Ufuk Talai has done wonders with this team to have them playing at this level so early in his tenure there with such, it's 3/4 of the new squad, and it took them, first 4 games of the season, they lost all 4 of them only by a single goal. They started then balancing that out by winning by a bunch of single goals. They had a nice 2-0 victory on the weekend, so that's a big win for them the way they're going. I think it's only the second time throughout the season so far that they've won by more than 1 goal, but that's just because they have a habit of leaking in 1 silly goal a year, and a game, rather, and they're that's kind of the trend with them, is that and this is a good thing, there are still little mistakes, there are still aspects of their attack in particular where they're not always the best at finishing. Last 2 games they've had really good first halves and then pretty sloppy second halves. So the crazy thing is they're playing as well as they are, and there's still room for improvement, and they're the kind of room for improvement where you actually believe, with a young squad that's all bursting onto the scene like this, just all guys taking their opportunities with 2 hands and really thriving at the A-League level, with a coach who seems to be able to get the best out of all his players, and constantly getting, one of the great trends as well from the season has been Ufuk Talai getting little tactical victories and just outthinking his opponent managers. And yeah, with the room they've still got to improve, and the way they're tracking at the moment, it's bloody good, man. It's every time the final, this is how I finished my last article about them, it's every time the final whistle blows in a Wellington Phoenix game, it's kind of sad, because you're well, I have to wait a whole nother week before I can watch this team again.
Sounds pretty lovely, doesn't it? And
it really is.
Not quite the same situation with the New Zealand Breakers by the looks of it.
No. Well, I mean, they... The crazy thing with the Breakers, and it's been the most crazy season of all, just for a complete wild number of stupid reasons, some of them completely avoidable, some of them completely unavoidable. I think the injuries have been the major factor in terms of performances on the court. Just when it looked like they had pretty much given up and started focusing on next season, they gave an unnecessary extension to a 4-10 coach, and then let Corey Webster walk away, and then suddenly they go on I think it was a 5-game winning streak in the end. But since then they've lost a couple games, so if they're going to make the semi-finals from this point, they probably need to win every single game. They have to play Sydney again, they have to play Perth away, so that's very, very, very unlikely to happen. But they've already at least acknowledged the existence of next season, which was something that didn't seem to be on the horizon at the start of the year when they were just making win now, win now, win now move all in a row, all after each other. So there's something to build on. They've got Dan Shamir's looked a little more comfortable recently. Scotty Hobson's playing great basketball. I'd say the one worry about in terms of getting the Breakers to build towards next year is that they only really have 2 players under contract, 3 technically, because RJ Hampton has a 2-year deal, but he only has a 2-year deal so that they get compensation when he gets drafted in a couple months. So Corey Webster, who's not even with the team right now, and Tom Abercrombie, who, to be fair to Tom Abercrombie, he's actually playing, he's been one of the main catalysts for them going on that little win streak. So they do have a couple nice things to build towards. Their coaching staff is settled now into the future, but yeah, we'll see how it goes, because I don't think they're going to make the playoffs this year. In fact, I'm just going to throw out that they're not going to make the playoffs this year, but that's the way it goes in sports.
Righto, Mr. Hot Take. Once again, with regards to Kiwi cricketing matters, somehow there is a rather large disparity between how the niche case views Blackcap matters and how the mainstream media is viewing Blackcap matters. And I say that to ask you this, Wildcard. How are you emotionally and spiritually dealing with the ultimate shocking series defeat in Australia? What a horrible moment for Kiwi cricket, Wildcard.
It was pretty horrible to watch, that's for bloody sure, but emotionally, spiritually, I think I'm coping all right. Certainly better than a lot of people. It's we could run through excuses for the team. They're not really excuses that they get away with, because the performance levels were pretty bloody bang average. But if you do have that number of injuries and illnesses throughout a tour, if you're playing Australia at a time when Australia has suddenly, Pat Cummins is now the best bowler in the world apparently, and Marnus Labuschagne is now the best batsman in the world apparently, at a time where they're just settling into being back on a par to where they once were. Australia is favourites against any single team in the world, and if you go in there to play them under strength, perhaps, I don't think amongst the terrible takes along the way, I saw Ken Rutherford popping up on the news at one point, teased in the intro as former Blackcaps captain former Blackcaps captain says that they went, I can't remember if he said underprepared or complacent. I think he said they were complacent going into the series, and I thought, there's no way that's true. Underprepared, I could hear an argument about. The revisionist history thing of why didn't they play a warm-up game before the series is pretty dumb, because they played a warm-up game between the first and second tests and it didn't make a difference, and the team they played was a bunch of club cricketers. So I think that whole narrative is very overrated. The whole thing is, there's just too many reasons why they obviously were going to struggle, and I don't think the nature of the defeats is reflective of the standard the Blackcaps are at, because I think that's just test cricket. Once you start losing, it's pretty easy to start losing by a lot. And there's so many terrible things that have been said about this that just absolutely reek of recency bias and just really over emotive reactions. But among the worst is the idea of this was worse than losing the World Cup final, because it's not even close. At least we got thrashed in this one, which is in a way better because it means we didn't feel like we should have won. And second of all, World Cup final is more winning the World Cup means more than winning a series in Australia. As much as big as that would have been, the World Cup final is the major, the ODI World Cup final is the major trophy that exists in cricket. So yeah, I don't know if you disagree with me there, but I would rather take the Cricket World Cup 100 times out of 100, and we were so close to getting that, and that was so much worse emotionally and spiritually compared to what the Blackcaps served up in Australia.
Ooh, yeah, couple of layers there. Maybe it's a bit of a famine scarcity mindset, because yeah, sure, the Blackcaps haven't played Test series in Australia a whole lot. They have kinda. It's just the Boxing Day test that has been missing, which whoop-de-fuck. For players and fans who go to the game, it might be a big deal, but we're watching on TV and it's just a test in a stadium ultimately. Like, let's be straight up here. So it's like a bit of a scarcity mindset, I think. So people are, oh my God, is it ever going to happen again? We missed our opportunity, blah, 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 and that sort of thing. Still believe that the Blackcaps, if they aren't at full strength with the first 11, and I think a first 11 test team for the Blackcaps is pretty easy to identify, just having the best cricketers in the team. If that's not the case, you're not going to win tests in Australia against that Australian team, which perhaps highlights, this is an idea I've used throughout debriefing that test series, the fantasy and the reality. Because if you're of this opinion that it's a shocking, very ridiculously crazy series loss in Australia and we need to make all sorts of changes and selection decisions, you are quite clearly living in a fantasy where the Blackcaps are a genuine kind of top 2 test team based on dominating teams around the world. The reality is that the Blackcaps have dominated teams in New Zealand, and that has no translation into a test series in Australia against a very good Australian team. So you're either living in the fantasy or you're either in the reality, where if you take a couple players out of this Blackcaps test team, not going to do so well. No surprises there. Any other miscellaneous notes, that any sporting topics that you want to just throw out there or ask me about in the next few minutes here?
Well, I mean, one building off what we were just talking about, I've seen a few people suggesting on the social medias that the Blackcaps are the most harshly treated of all the New Zealand sports teams, and I don't think that's true, but because I think the Blackcaps also get a lot of, like, basically what you're just saying, they also get a lot of love, and their reputation has been boosted by things in a way that, like, yeah, absolutely, their results in New Zealand conditions have been fantastic for the last couple of years, but they haven't played a lot of cricket outside of New Zealand, let alone won a lot of cricket outside of New Zealand. There was a great series win in the UAE, which had a couple sort of, at least one very miracle victory along the way there, so it's not like we were wiping the floor with them. And technically, I don't really subscribe to this idea, but technically that's a neutral ground series as well. Also, going to Sri Lanka most recently, only drew that series against Sri Lanka. Like, a team second in the world should probably be able to beat a rebuilding Sri Lanka team, even in their own conditions, like Australia, India would have. So that's the standard we want to hold ourselves to. But I will say with the Blackcaps is they seem to be, of all these New Zealand sports teams, of all the teams that get sort of like mainstream coverage to a decent level in this country, they seem to be the team that's most affected by, like, the old "you're only as good as your last result" kind of theory. They more than any other team seem to be the one that gets the most immediate, like, emotional reactions to them, which completely ignore, like, all of the context that led up to things. I mean, you can say the New Zealand Warriors get a lot of backlash as soon as they lose, but that's built up on historical reasons and the old Warriors curse that we've discussed many a time. The Blackcaps, just, like, when they win, everyone thinks they're amazing. When they lose, everyone thinks they're terrible, and it just swings like a pendulum in that way, eh?
Yeah, correct. And I believe that is more a case of miseducation of sports fans, and
that's definitely part
considering
of it.
Up to this point, like, every Kiwi sports fan has got their information from mainstream media outlets, and when that is the case, because it's exactly the same for the Warriors, in the sense that you get these crazy ups and downs when certain expectations are set in your head that don't align with the reality. So again, it's fantasy and reality. If you're living in the fantasy world where you believe the Warriors are this came to the forefront when Roger Tuivasa-Sheck was injured. I think he had that big knee injury and he was out for the season. And people were still expecting the Warriors to be competing with the best in the NRL. And no. Expectations are set with a certain paradigm. So whether it's the Warriors, whether it's the Blackcaps, expectations are set in people's minds, and I don't agree with these expectations necessarily because they're extreme, but their expectations are set with, like, if they have their best team available for the bulk of the season or a test or a series, then maybe we might reach those heights. As soon as any change or there is any sort of variable into that team, you have to reassess your expectations. Now, that's if you haven't, like, sensibly set your expectations to start with. Because, like, with the Blackcaps, for example, very good in New Zealand, up and down overseas, and especially against good teams overseas. So having the expectation that the Blackcaps were going to be super competitive against Australia with a slightly weaker team overseas in very difficult conditions, those are not sensible expectations. But if you have those expectations for whatever reason, losing 3 tests in a row, getting swept in a series, is a shocking result. But then if you bring your expectations down a bit to a more sensible level based on any variables that have variations, whatever it is that have occurred, the level of your reaction, the gap between your expectation and your reaction decreases. But then as your expectation increases, the gap between your expectation and your reaction increases as well. So I think a lot of that is just based on Kiwi sports fans not really being tuned into what is really happening. They kind of just see a surface level appearance and they base their expectations on that. And with the Blackcaps specifically, you've got a high profile series in Australia where lots of different eyeballs who might not be necessarily fully tapped into Blackcaps cricket, it's a completely different world for them. And to kind of wrap it up, I just had this strange thought. The type of thing I would tweet, like I don't tweet, but I would tweet this if I gave a shit about tweeting stuff. I was watching Tom Blundell wicket keep for the Wellington Firebirds in their Super Smash game. I was like, there's got to be some people around New Zealand who are watching this and they're like, wait, Tom Blundell's a wicketkeeper? What's happening here? You know, because we've just seen Tom Blundell. Yeah, he's a fielder. He's an opening batsman. He's one of the best batsmen in New Zealand. No, Tom Blundell's a wicketkeeper, middle order batsman for the Wellington Firebirds, and now here he is opening the batting for the Blackcaps. But you can just imagine a world where people, it's just a nice little microcosm of tapping the surface of Blackcaps cricket compared to paying attention to everything around the Blackcaps, and that's where you can build sensible expectations from.
Yeah, that's one thing I always really, especially like recently in the last, the last few weeks, we've been going on a little bit of a boom with the old views on the website, and one of the things I've definitely noticed in that time, and it's something that's always the case, it's just more of a volume at the moment, is like the quality of comments that we get on like Facebook and Twitter replies and things like that. We don't have comments on the website because they're stupid, but people are always more than welcome to discuss things in our mentions. We don't tend to respond to that a massive amount just because we're busy on the next thing once we've published the first thing. But especially on some of the cricket articles, like the thoughtfulness that goes into some of the comments that we get is of a very high level, and it's always very pleasing because I think it reflects quite well on like these are the kind of readers and listeners and such that we're trying to cultivate, like people who actually want something a bit more substantial from their coverage. And like because I'm in the midst of wrapping up Flying Kiwis for the week at the moment, like that often takes me down some deep dives trying to do research about Kiwi footballers, where I stumble on like comment sections and things like that, and then you look at other websites and it's like the absolute idiocy that people like, why do you even want to share this sentence that it's just basically abusing the person before you? Like, what are you achieving by this? What's going on here? Like, that's always that disparity is always something that's very very I think rewarding to us as considering this is what we're trying to do. And I also was just thinking, as you're saying that, about how to tie that into Steven Adams, our main subject of the day, because I think with basketball fans, like, if you're a basketball fan and you get your news about Steven Adams through the TV 6 o'clock news type things, you're not really a basketball fan, because the surface level kind of thing of those, like the massive focus on just like doubles and dunks and those kind of things, and it'll be like 3 stories about rugby, maybe one about cricket, and then Steven Adams' Oklahoma City Thunder had a good win today, and Steven Adams had this great dunk. Here's the highlight. Yeah, what a dunk. That's great. And then that's it. Like, no context, no worry about it. Just nothing really going on there. But if you're a basketball fan in New Zealand who's been following Steven Adams a little bit more closely, you've already learnt how to circumvent the kind of the mainstream gateways, because you've been like, obviously the coverage of the NBA is much better in America, where the NBA is. So like, you've already cultivated your sources and your preferred, like, maybe a couple podcasts that you really like, the readers that you choose to follow the most. Like, you've already kind of done this if you want to be a decent basketball fan in this country. So I think there's a weirdness there where there is a surface level Kiwi media sort of focus or identity, we'll say, for Steven Adams, and then there's the Steven Adams identity from people who have dug deeper and follow basketball from an NBA perspective rather than just from a Steven Adams as your entry point perspective kind of thing. And yeah, there's a big difference between those two things. I dare say, Doc, that we will be focusing more on the latter side of that argument in our conversation here today.
Righty-yo. Well, can I just set this up by...
Please do.
Rolling through how I'm perceiving some Steven Adams and Oklahoma City Thunder stuff. And that starts with a quick little squiz at his statistics. So you've got this season's statistics compared to his career averages. So this season he's averaging 12 points a game compared to 9.8 points a game across his career. So that's a good start. He is 2.7 assists versus 1.1 assists in his career. So his assists are up this season. He's shooting a little bit better from the field, 61.4% versus 59%. And when I watched the Oklahoma City Thunder wildcard, for starters, it's beautiful to see stuff like this happens, because everyone kind of thought the Oklahoma City Thunder would just fuck around and trade Chris Paul. And some of that might still happen, but now you've got a situation where Chris Paul and someone like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and even from watching a couple games, just having someone like Danilo Gallinari, who can shoot the ball very well, everyone has fitted into the Oklahoma City Thunder team nicely. And you've got this guy, Chris Paul, running the show at point guard. And I'm not sure how you view how the Thunder are using Steven Adams, but just looking at that assist number of 2.7 assists this season, which may be a career high. It sure is. This is the first time in Steven Adams' career that he has averaged not just over 2 assists per game, but over 1.7 assists per game. So fantastic with the ball in a little playmaking role. This kind of works in conjunction with the change of style in the NBA, where, say, if Steven Adams was around 10 years ago, he'd be given the ball in the paint, and then it'll be his job to get a bucket, and they might do that every second time down that end of the court as when Steven Adams is playing. Now, like, just from a few games I've seen, quite often the ball will go into Steven Adams in that position, but Steven Adams' role in that position sometimes might be to roll to the bucket and get a bucket. Otherwise, that's where his assists are coming in. Like, It happened quite a few times where someone will get him the ball, either Chris Paul or Gilgeous Alexander, and then Steven Adams becomes a bit of a passer from that to use some basketball jargon, the elbow, and then he kind of works from there, as opposed to a more, again, just correct me if I'm wrong here, as opposed to a more kind of pick and roll style that he would have done with Russell Westbrook. Chris Paul's very good at the pick and roll, so there is still pick and roll stuff, but it seems, in a very general sense, I guess my point here, Wildcard, is that the skill set of Steven Adams has been amplified by the pieces that have been brought in, because quite often he's playing alongside Gallinari. That was a terrible way of saying Gallinari. That was very Australian. He's playing alongside Gallinari, who's a bit of a better shooter. So Steven Adams can get the ball. He's got one big man on him. If that big man isn't the same size and stature and defensive prowess, Steven Adams is going to roll him. Otherwise, Steven Adams can pass to the other big man on the Thunder's team, Gallinari, and he can shoot a 3. He can shoot a 2. Whether it's the Chris Paul pick and rolling, more assists, better shooter than Russell Westbrook perhaps as well. It just seems like that the team that the Thunder have right now is better suited to Steven Adams and his skill set at this juncture. Like, obviously, if you had this situation in Steven Adams' first year in the league, it's going to be quite difficult because he doesn't have these skills just yet. But it just seems like a perfect matrimony of Steven Adams' growth now being combined with some nice pieces alongside him, and perhaps ultimately, could this team have been built around Steven Adams? Like, that's kind of perhaps what it feels like.
Sort of. I mean, it's mostly built around Chris Paul, but Steven Adams is one of the major aspects, or one of the major pieces that that allows Chris Paul to do what he does best. And there's a couple different ways, most of which you touched on there, in which that happens. And like Chris Paul compared to Russell Westbrook is, and I watched the Thunder absolutely lay the beat down on the Houston Rockets the other day, and there was a lot of that because it was Russell Westbrook's return to OKC, so there was a lot of focus. They played him a tribute video at the start, which was very moving and touching and all that, and he got a great reception, an incredible reception for Russ, which is exactly what he should get in that situation. He then proceeded to not play anywhere near his best, and the Thunder, thrashed the Rockets in a funny way. But there was a lot of comparisons between this year and last year for both teams, and they were talking about how the Houston Rockets have gone from one of the slowest teams to one of the quickest teams in terms of pace of play, and the Thunder are kind of going in the opposite direction because you don't have Russell Westbrook running a mile a minute, like downhill, hoop to hoop kind of thing anymore in transition. You got Chris Paul orchestrating a half-court offense, and orchestrating like in a literal sense too. He's really just like he's the puppet master there, and for 3 quarters he's got this tendency of just kind of being a laid-back facilitator, just moving the ball around nicely, making sure everyone gets their shots. It's a very open offense, and then in the 4th quarter, he knows how to just flick the switch. And I don't know if it's still true because this was about a week ago, and these stats tend to change pretty quickly. But and also the 2 games OKC have played since. I think they play again this afternoon. But yeah, we're recording this before they play the Timberwolves. The 2 games they've played since, they thrashed the Rockets and then got thrashed by the Lakers, which was a bit of a blow over. The Lakers on the wrong end of a back-to-back, resting Anthony Davis, resting LeBron James, and they still thrashed the Thunder, so that was a weird one. But yeah, neither of those 2 games had any crunch time because of the results. But Chris Paul, before that, at the time I wrote the last Kiwi Steve thing, the 5th one, he had scored more crunch time points than anyone else in the league, and that's just what he does. He'll have like 3 points going into the 4th quarter, and then he'll score a quick 12 to lead the team with not lead the team, but to lead the team to victory in that way. And Steven Adams' pick and roll stuff is important in that sense. He is it's one of the ways that Chris Paul prefers to score, is to just get in that mid range and just lob one up. And being able to just have a really reliable screen setter like Steven Adams is a big part of that. And you also touched on the thing in Adams's game in particular that I've been the most excited about, which is his passing this season. And yeah, Chris Paul is not afraid to hand the ball off to Steven Adams at the top of the key in that situation where a traditional big man might not go anywhere near it. He's not going to shoot a three-pointer in that situation. You often see him playing with his back to the basket, standing, 18, 20 feet away, but he'll hand it off. He'll like shield you from the next guy coming through. He'll set an on-ball screen. He'll do like he's got a lot of assists in that way, just like gentle handing the ball off to Dennis Schroeder or Danilo Gallinari or someone like that. And he also gets a lot of assists. Obviously, he gets plenty from the way you described. The other way, I would say, the third main way that he gets assists is rebounding and then just immediately kicking it out. And yeah, there are a lot of the ways of how the Thunder are playing this year, and it all does come down to Chris Paul, really, because Chris Paul is the pace setter. He's the guy who dictates how everything goes, and getting him completely bought in the situation he was in. He'd prefer to play for a contender, but he's really embraced being a leader and a mentor on this roster and just helping the Thunder to play to their potential and bringing some of these young guys through, like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander most of all, I think he might even be their leading scorer. Danilo Gallinari as well as a veteran. He's 30 years old or something. He's on an expiring contract as well, so he's the one to watch if they do want to move someone. I think Adams' contract is hard to move because of A, the marketplace for centers, and B, the fact that he is pretty well paid. That's a bit of a commitment. I don't know that the team, like a championship team, doesn't have the cap flexibility to be able to trade for someone like him. Same as for Chris Paul, who remains an outrageously good player even if his contract is outrageously bad. Like, two things can be true, and those things are both true. So yeah, just Chris Paul having that absolute buy-in, I think, has been huge in terms of elevating everyone around him, really, and elevating this Thunder team from where they started 8-12, and then I think since then they've gone 14-5. One of the better records in the entire NBA in that time, and that's also losing their most recent game. And that has launched them up to, I think, 7th seed in the West, to where they play this way, they should make the playoffs. And it's not just like 19 games is a long time to just be on a trend. And I think with Steven Adams as well, like, he went through his stats. His stats are even better if you look in the most recent. I'll whip it up on the thing, actually. I'll see what his stats look like over the last 19 games, because he had a couple injuries to start the season, and he wasn't playing anywhere near at his potential. So over his last 21 games, he's averaging 13.9 points per game, which is actually what he averaged the last two seasons. 11 rebounds, big career high. That would be 2.5 assists, 1.3 blocks, fewer than 2 turnovers and 2 fouls per game, shooting 64%. He's actually got his free throw percentage up a little bit as well to 60, just a shade under 63%. So that's nothing fantastic, but it's a lot better than what he was doing before that. And the thing to remember when we're talking about per games as well, he might be averaging the same amount of points per game as last season, but he's doing it in about at least 4 or 5 fewer minutes than he did. So much more efficient, and playing within a team that shares the ball with a number of. I think you got Chris Paul averaging about 16 or something like that. You got actually, this is stupid. I should just look that up before making guess. You've also got Gilgeous-Alexander and Danilo Gallinari both averaging at least about 18, 19, I would say. Where's my page down? Gilgeous-Alexander averaging 19.9, Chris Paul 16.7, Schroeder 18.3 off the bench, and Gallinari 18.3. So Steven Adams is matching his career highs. He's only the 5th top scorer on this team. So yeah, a lot of reasons why things are looking a lot rosier these days for the Thunder than they were even just a month and a half ago, really.
You did mention the kind of bigger picture here, which is the Thunder sitting in 7th in the Western Conference, 22 wins, 17 losses, win percentage of .564. And the only real team I care about here is the Spurs getting into the playoffs and cracking that 8th spot. They are currently in 9th, because I think it's actually quite a similar narrative and idea around the Spurs is that they weren't meant to be in the playoffs. They were meant to be struggling. just like the Thunder were meant to be struggling. And it's always a beautiful thing when teams find a way to connect and do pretty well. So perfect world, the Thunder make the playoffs and the Spurs make the playoffs. Do you see like a scope where the Thunder could either move up the Western Conference rankings or go deep into the playoffs? I will just raise this idea as well, Wildcard. The Thunder's win percentage would be good enough to have them 7th in the Eastern Conference as well. So they're in that bracket across the whole NBA, not just in the Western Conference. The Western Conference is a bit stronger. Eastern Conference is quite congested though, because there's a lot of teams in the same kind of area code. So how do you, in forecasting like where Steven Adams and the Thunder might roll on from this point, is it that this run that they're on isn't very sustainable? Can you see like a best case scenario actually happening? How are you kind of assessing it from a forecasting viewpoint with the Thunder as a team and with Steven Adams?
Well, as far as moving up in the standings goes, I think that's going to be a difficult task. There's some pretty good teams in the Western Conference, and like nobody's going to catch the Lakers at the top. The Nuggets and the Jazz have been playing pretty well recently. Rockets are always going to win a lot of games because James Harden is irrepressible. And then the Clippers obviously are a team built for the postseason as well. We've got Kawhi Leonard, Mr. Load Management, and Paul George, who is coming off off-season shoulder surgery. That's, you know, they're a team that's going to be happy to slide into 4th or 5th, and they're going to try to do what the Toronto Raptors did last year with Kawhi Leonard and just peak at the exact right time when it matters and win those playoff games against big teams. And then also, the Dallas Mavericks are looking pretty sharp this year with Luka Doncic emerging from Rookie of the Year to MVP candidate within a single season, which is outrageous, and he's incredible. I think they're still... Their Mavericks are a team who might be catchable for the Thunder because I think the Mavs just having young leaders on that team and Porzingis and Doncic not having played together before, I think they might be one piece away. Whether they can get someone like an Andre Iguodala, that might help things, but I think I think they might be a little too inconsistent to be running with those top 5. So the Thunder maybe could slide up to 6th or something like that, which would actually be a big deal because it would mean not playing the Lakers or the Nuggets, who are two teams. Well, we don't know how the standings will end up, but yeah, you don't want to be 8th and playing the Lakers and getting swept because that's most likely what will happen to whoever ends up there. I do hope it is the Spurs because the Spurs, 21 years in a row they've made the playoffs. I don't want to see that streak broken as long as Popovich is still the coach there. And if Steven Adams was to be traded to any team in the league, obviously, the Dallas Mavericks, because I support them, would be my first choice, and my second choice would be the San Antonio Spurs. And Adams, in his book, and also talking to Zach Lowe on his podcast the other week, has been pretty vocal about his adoration for Mr. Greg Popovich. So that would be, in the unfortunate event of a trade, which I don't think is at all likely, especially not when Andre Drummond is already like the big money center getting interest from other teams around the league. Well, I don't think that's at all likely, and if it did happen, he'd probably go to a mud team as well, which also wouldn't be ideal. So I don't know that the Thunder... I'm not sure they got it in them to make a playoff run. They might be able to win a first-round series in an upset. I don't think they'll finish higher than 6th seed, but I think even this is overachieving, and this is like... Considering people thought they would just tank because they made the Paul George trade and Russell Westbrook left, and they got all these picks all at once. Like, why not just tank and then rebuild? And it's part of the, the process 2.0. And it's like, well, the whole time I was trying to say, like, well, they've already got the picks. They don't really need to tank anymore. If you happen to be struggling, okay, whatever. You reassess as things go along. You have a look at as you come up to the trade deadline, who can be moved, what can you get for them, sort of thing. I think Gallinari, as an expiring contract and a guy who can shoot as a big man, he will have some teams out there that are pretty keen on his services, and they might be able to get a first round pick back for him even. I don't know, but it will be interesting to see how the Thunder assess things, because I don't think they're gonna have a long term over the course of this single season. I don't think they're gonna be able to make a big run necessarily, but you still want to kind of give yourself that chance, right? Like that's sports. You just got to be in the picture. You got to hang around long enough and see what happens. If you don't give yourself the chance, if you give up before you're even there, you never know what might have happened. So I don't know. Their form over the basically since the start of December has been fantastic. So, and on par with some of those better teams in the NBA as well, winning 3/4 of their games basically. So I think you want to see how it pans out at this point, and I don't know that they'll be rushing to make any trades. But yeah, it's always one of those things you got to reassess on the fly. I mean, Gallinari, the Thunder are playing great basketball at the moment. He's scoring a lot of points. He's shooting well. He's shooting by far the most threes he's ever shot in his career, and everyone just seems to be having a lot of fun. So who's to say he doesn't want to re-sign at the end of the season as well? Like you never quite know how these things might go. They might think they've already got their core, add a couple young players in the draft, keep adding guys. Maybe you trade Chris Paul in a year or two when his contract is a little more run down. You never know. Like there's a lot of options that they have, and one of those options is, and this should always be the preferable option for any coach, any general manager, any franchise, try win as many games as you can this season and then see what happens.
Which I guess is the last kind of stage of this conversation, especially in the realm of possible team moves and stuff. I think it's quite a unique environment with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So my feel is that standard business practice does not apply to the Thunder. So, for example, trading Steven Adams and getting rid of Steven Adams would be a pretty drastic move for the Thunder. They've got someone who, at this stage, is the last kind of stalwart of the Thunder. There's no one left other than Chris Paul returning to the Thunder, returning to Oklahoma City, where there was that situation with Hurricane Katrina way back in the day where he had to play in Oklahoma City with his...
Yeah, when he was playing for New Orleans, yeah.
Yes. So the Steven Adams is the last dude at the Thunder, and he's such his mana in the Thunder organization, his mana in Oklahoma City Thunder, like when people are talking about trading Steven Adams or Steven Adams' future, the salary obviously is a massive component. Last season, he earned $24 million. The season before, he earned $22 million. And that was a considerable increase from his rookie deal, where he was on between $2 to $3 million a season. But I think for the Thunder, again, this is all just my instinct and, what I've picked up in my feel and stuff like that. For the Thunder, you're not necessarily paying $20 million for Steven Adams on the basketball court. You're paying Steven Adams a lot of money for the whole package. Not just the whole package in terms of Steven Adams, but the whole package in terms of how Steven Adams integrates with Oklahoma City and Oklahoma City Thunder, which at this stage is like the whole foundation that the Thunder are kind of built on, is the presence of Steven Adams and his skill set, but also his mana as a person, as a man, as an athlete in Oklahoma City. So while it's a very easy thing to say, and this is how a lot of the basketball people talk about basketball, they just kind of mention, you could just get rid of Steven Adams' salary and then do this move and do that move. Perhaps for other teams that might apply, but with Steven Adams and the Oklahoma City Thunder, there's a much more wholesome vibe to what is happening. And if this team is to be competitive, Steven Adams is the focal point. And right now, yeah, like Chris Paul is the main player. You've got another very skillful point guard in Gilgeous-Alexander, but the man setting the tone, the man setting the energy of we are Oklahoma City Thunder, that's Steven Adams. And there is a value to that. And it's not something you just want to flick off. Especially when you've kind of... when Steven Adams is the last dude who is Mr. Oklahoma City.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean he is a direct line to Nick Collison and like Serge Ibaka and Kendrick Perkins and those kind of guys, and through that, I mean there's a few other direct lines to Russell Westbrook because he was there as recently as last season, but then like Kevin Durant and those times as well. Like Steven Adams is a culture setter for this team in a way that no one else really is. Like he's a guy who trains extremely hard. He's a guy who has a great attitude. He's a guy that will, do as the coach says. And just quietly, I think Billy Donovan's having an outstandingly good season as head coach of the Oklahoma City Thunder. I think when you've got Russell Westbrook, it's not a criticism of Westbrook, but it is just kind of the fact you play to the style of your best player, and Russell Westbrook dictates a certain amount of like coaching deference, I think. And Chris Paul is an on-court coach himself, so it's a bit different, and Donovan's able to like really set up an offense and a defensive scheme, which is working quite nicely at the moment. I think he's coaching his ass off, really. And Steven Adams is a part of that because he's one of those guys who's aligned to the coach who's been there for the entire time that Billy Donovan has been in Oklahoma City. So he's one of the guys probably that he trusts the most and who can help impart his messages throughout the squad. Like there's a lot of reasons beyond the actual like minute 1 to 48 of a basketball game why Adams, and it's not like he's playing badly in those 48 minutes either, but there are a lot of reasons off the court why he's a massive part of this team. And yeah, I think if the right move came along with the right amount of compensation, they would consider trading him. I think there's only, 4 or 5 players in the entire NBA who are entirely untradeable, and that changes depending on contract situations and player happiness and stuff anyway at the moment, especially like in this current era of the NBA. So I think there is a realm of possibility in which he could be traded. I just don't think the team exists that has the right, that has A, the cap balance, B, the draft picks, and C, the players to balance the salaries out. I don't think that exists in the NBA right now to be able to trade for him. And what happens with Andre Drummond is actually a very interesting saga going on right now, him and the Detroit Pistons, where they've pretty much accepted the Detroit Pistons haven't been able to achieve what they wanted to with Drummond, and they're looking to, I don't know if they're looking to trade him, but they're certainly open, and there are teams, the Atlanta Hawks and the New York Knicks at the moment seem to be the two that are linked with him the most. How that saga unfolds will say a lot about what the marketplace looks like for centers as we near the trade deadline in 2 months or whatever it is. So, but yeah, I just don't think that market exists anyway. And even if it did, I think it would take a lot to pry Adams away because of how well they've gone since the start of December, which changes expectations completely. Because suddenly you're thinking, well, what can we do this year? Maybe we can do something interesting. At least like get to the playoffs and like maybe win a first round series. But if not, like they've lost 3 straight first round series in a row. So. Yeah, their playoff history in recent times is a little sketchy, but this is a very different team to that. So you want to see what might happen, and also just like for the culture, for the rebuild, for the future. Like Chris Paul might be the trendsetter on the court and doing a pretty good job off the court as well, but he's not a long-term guy, whereas Steven Adams could spend potentially another 8 to 10 years in Oklahoma City. So he can be a centerpiece of the franchise in a number of ways. So yeah, I don't believe a trade is anywhere near. It's possible, but it's not likely to any like degree. I don't think. I would pretty comfortably say he'll see out this season and the next after that in Oklahoma City.
Yeah, and I guess the layer of nuance here is that it's one thing to say a trade is possible based on Steven Adams's basketball ability, but the price increases when you're dealing with Steven Adams and the Oklahoma City Thunder. You're going to have to break the bank to part that relationship. Sam Presti isn't just going to let Steven Adams go for a deal that is of similar, like, to receive that which is of similar contract value. Like, there's a value in what Steven Adams brings to the Thunder, which increases what you're going to have to give the Thunder, which, as you said, there's not many teams with that sort of leeway and flexibility to make a move as high as that. And Sam Presti, I think he was on the Woj pod prior to the season starting, kind of talking about trading Westbrook, and there was a duty of care given to Westbrook. It was we needed to look after Russell Westbrook for what he has done for the Oklahoma City Thunder. That is like the best way to go about this. That would be afforded to Steven Adams as well.
Yeah, and I don't think Russ would have been traded if he hadn't like proposed the idea as well. If he hadn't said, "Well, maybe it's time for us to move on," and the Rockets are interested, maybe you should have that conversation. Like, I give you permission to at least see how this kind of thing goes. I don't think they would have come to him with that suggestion. Certainly not directly. They might have dropped hints or something like that. And Steven Adams isn't going to ask to be traded, so very different situation there as well. It actually sort of reminds me of how Kendrick Perkins ended up at the Thunder back in the day as well, when they traded for him from, this is pre-Steven Adams as well, they traded for him from the Boston Celtics right around the time of like near the end of Garnett, Pierce, and Allen, sort of that era where they had won a title, and then I think it might have been the year straight after they won the title actually, and they were hoping to run it back. Either way, they were like a possible title contender that season, under Doc Rivers as well, and they traded. And Doc Rivers has said ever since, like, he regrets this. He never should have done it, but he sort of bowed down to pressure from the management to trade Kendrick Perkins, who was averaging like 2 points and 3 rebounds per game, and I think had some injuries as well, and they were worried that he just was going to break down a little bit. He wasn't going to be the same player anymore, which, to be fair, he really wasn't. But the Celtics players in particular hated the idea of trading him when it came up, and Doc Rivers pretty soon regretted it, and their season just didn't go the way they should have afterwards, and they realized he had a value beyond his stat line. Like, he was a guy who he was their defensive leader. He was a guy who held other people accountable, a different kind of leader to what Steven Adams is. He was definitely a bit more of a he himself said the thing about being a silverback in that famous story with I'm the only silverback here, when he muscled up with a rookie Steven Adams back in the day. And yeah, like, that was one that sort of derailed that season a little bit of a way, and you could even argue that it was the end of that little mini dynasty, the end of that era for the Celtics. It was only a few years later that the big Brooklyn Nets trade happened, which of course also has a Kiwi connection, because Sean Marks was the guy brought in to mop up after that. So I started off by telling just a cautionary tale and ended up spinning a yarn that sort of encapsulated the two major New Zealanders in the NBA at the moment. Funny how these things go. The cyclical nature of the world.
Yeah, to wrap it all up, my feeling on the Oklahoma City Thunder and Sam Presti is that they value Steven Adams immensely. And it would be a rather extreme circumstance for that to happen, which, to sum up the podcast, is where Steven Adams sits. He's not just the Kiwi in the NBA. He's not just a Kiwi basketballer whose basketball abilities have him among the best, if not the best, in his position, which is an incredibly niggly situation considering how his position has changed throughout Steven Adams' time in the NBA alone, which is fucking crazy to think about, that Steven Adams has adapted to all the changes in the NBA to be in this position. But our dude in the NBA, Steven Adams, is Mr. Oklahoma City Thunder, which is more beautiful than him being the Kiwi in the NBA. It's more beautiful than him being really good in the NBA. Steven Adams has taken the whole Kiwi shtick and embedded himself in the Oklahoma City Thunder situation, and here we are, and it's all working out pretty well as of mid-January 2020.
It really is quite beautiful, because that Mr. Thunder was the nickname that, I don't know if Adams coined it. I think it might have been around a while before that, but that's the nickname that Nick Collison always had. And Nick Collison was a player who had an immense impact on Steven Adams as he was coming up as a rookie, as his first few years in the league, and he will always speak in the most absolutely glowing terms about old Mr. Thunder. So, and I think if you ask Collison himself, he would say, if you asked him who was the next Mr. Thunder, who are you passing the torch to? I'm 100% confident he would immediately say Steven Adams' name.
Booyakasha.
Lineage.
And we'll wrap it up there. We, at some point in the coming days, we'll probably have some Blackcaps and White Ferns T20 squads. There will be some footballing stuff to go deeper into with the wild card. We also will make a episode of our Patreon podcast. So if you are listening to these episodes of the Nishcast and you do appreciate what we're doing, if you're reading what we do and you appreciate that as well, the best places to support us is on Patreon. So jump on there and support us up the guts, and we do a little episode of the podcast just for our patrons. Otherwise, kia kaha, stay beautiful, and we'll catch you in the next week or so. Cha-cha.